Hey everybody, Mr. Reeves back with you today. And today we're going to be looking at adding and subtracting rational numbers. Now, your textbook does it kind of differently. They do adding and they include fractions and decimals together. And then they go over and they do subtracting as a separate section. And then they do fractions and decimals together. So what we're going to do is a little bit different. We're going to do adding and subtracting fractions and mixed numbers, and then we're going to do adding and subtracting decimals separately. So today we're going to look at adding and subtracting fractions and mixed numbers. And again, what makes this different than what we've already done? Well, not this year, but in previous years, you should have done adding and subtracting fractions that were positive. And this year, we did spend quite a bit of time adding and subtracting integers, which we looked at as positive numbers and negative whole numbers, or the opposite of whole numbers. So now what we're doing is we're combining those two things. We're combining your fraction skills with your operations on positive and negative number skills, okay? Which can be a little tricky because you have to remember both things, which is why we're reviewing those two things today. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive right in with some examples, and I'm going to teach you through examples. All right, and as we often do, we're going to start off with some easier ones. Okay, so for example, this first problem right here, we have the problem 5/4 minus 3/4. Now, hopefully you recall when you were adding or subtracting fractions, you must have a common denominator, and fortunately these ones do. So if I have 5/4 and I want to subtract 3/4, there is no problem here because 3 is smaller than 5. So I get 5/4 minus 3/4, which would be 2/4. All right, now the instructions on this worksheet do not specifically say, but we should always try to make sure that we simplify our fractions, okay? Which means that we need to divide out any common factors. Well, 2 and 4 are both divisible by 2. So when I'm done with this, I get 2 divided by 2, which is 1, and 4 divided by 2 is 2. So my answer is 1/2. So 5/4 minus 3/4 gives me 2/4, but 2/4 simplifies down to 1/2, okay? Again, right here we have a common denominator, and this number is smaller, so we would get 3 minus 1, which is 2 over 2 again, because the common denominator just stays the same. Well, 2 over 2 simplifies to 1. And again, we would be done there. Okay, now down here on number 3, we have not a subtraction problem, but rather an addition problem. Again, with my common denominator, my denominator stays the same. 2 plus 4 is 6, and I get 6/5. And by the way, there's absolutely nothing wrong with writing your answer as an improper fraction. I know in elementary school your teachers often made you change that. 6/5 is perfectly acceptable. But if you were asked to write it as a mixed number, or you just really felt the need to, you could change that to 1 and 1/5, because 5 goes into 6 one time with 1 remainder. So either one of those answers would be completely acceptable in my book, okay? All right, so let's scroll down a little bit further on this worksheet, all right, until we get to a problem that is a little bit more complicated. All right, so now we get to some problems where we don't have common denominators. All right, at least this one right here. This one does have a common denominator, and I actually want to do number 10 first, because this is the first case where we actually are dealing with negative numbers. All right, so as you recall, when you have a subtraction problem, you change subtraction to adding the opposite. And when you have an addition problem, you have to say, what do I have more of? Do I have more positives or more negatives, and how many more do I have? Well, this is a subtraction problem right here. So I'm going to change this subtraction to adding the opposite. So 1/3 minus a negative 5/3 is going to become 1 plus a positive 5/3. Again, subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive. And then what would I get? Again, because we have our common denominator of 3, 5 plus 1 is 6. All right, and then 6/3. Well, 3 goes into 6 evenly, doesn't it? That would just be an answer of 2, and we would be done. Okay? All right, and I'm actually going to skip down to number 11 because I want to do an addition problem here. And now we don't have a common denominator. You cannot add fractions together without a common denominator. All right, so I'm going to rewrite -1/3 here and 3/8, and we are going to try to find a common denominator. Remember, a common denominator is, it's called common because it is a common multiple of both of these numbers, and it's called the denominator because, well, it's the denominator. So what is a number that 3 and 8 both go into? All right, well, many times the easiest way to find a common denominator is simply to multiply the two numbers together. That will always give you a common denominator. It will not always give you the least one. In this case, that's what we have going on. 3 times 8 is 24. That's going to be our least common denominator. So this is what we do. We say we have 3/8. What do I have to multiply 8 by to get 24? 3/3. So I multiply the top and the bottom by 3. Whatever you do to the denominator, you must do to the numerator. And I get 9/24. All right. This one I have -1/3. What do I have to multiply 3 by to get 24? I have to multiply 8, and I get -8/24. So this problem, -1/3 plus 3/8, has now changed into the problem -8/24 plus 9/24. So now we have those common denominators that we were looking for, right? But we have to also deal with the fact that I have a positive number and I have a negative number. And remember, when you're adding positives and negatives together, you say, what do I have more of, and how many more do I have? Do I have more positives or more negatives here? Well, 9 is a bigger number than 8 when I take this absolute value. So I have one more positive. So my answer is a positive 1/24. A positive 1/24. All right, so let's take a look at number 12 here. Same idea. I've got a -10/7 and I have a positive 1/6. And I want to know what is a common denominator. What is my least common denominator? Again, it turns out for 7 and 6 that 42, or 7 times 6, is my least common denominator. So I'm going to take my fraction, and I'm going to multiply this one by 6/6, because 7 times 6 is 42. I'm going to multiply this one by 7/7, because 6 times 7 is 42. So see, on this one I get 7 times 6. This one I get 6 times 7. But again, whatever you multiply the bottom by, you multiply the top by. So I get -60/42. And then on this one I get 7/42. All right, so I'm going to rewrite it. So my original problem, -10/7 plus 1/6, becomes -60/42 plus 7/42. And again, now I'm a very happy camper because I got those common denominators. All right, but also, again, I've got a positive number here and a negative number here. It's addition. So I ask myself, what do I have more of? I have more negatives, right? How many more do I have? All right, well, that means I need to do 60 minus 7, and that gives me 53. So I have 53 more negatives, all right? And they're actually 53/42 more negatives, okay? So there's a couple problems of adding where you did not have a common denominator and the signs were different. All right, let's go back up to this one. This is subtracting, right? So the first thing I'm going to say is subtracting a positive is the same as adding a negative. Subtracting a positive is the same as adding a negative. Okay, so I've got negative 4/5 and I've got negative 7/8. All right, and again, I'm looking for a common denominator. What is a number that 5 and 8 both go into? And once again, we have a case where the least common denominator simply is acquired by multiplying these fractions by the other denominator. So negative 4/5, I'm going to multiply by 8 over 8 because 5 times 8 is 40. And negative 7/8, I'm going to multiply by 5 over 5 because 5 times 8 is 40. So there is my common denominator. That's actually a 40. Okay, what do I get on the top? Negative 4 times 8 is negative 32. And negative 7 times 5 is negative 35. All right, so now what do I have? I have negative 32 over 40 plus negative 35 over 40. Right, there's my common denominators, only this time the signs are the same, right? When the signs are the same, you just put them all together. 32 negatives plus 35 more negatives, that's going to give me negative 67 over 40. And again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that answer. Even though it's an improper fraction, you can leave it like that. All right, but if you don't like it, you could say 40 goes into 67 once with 27 left over. So there would be your mixed number answer right there. All right, let's go ahead and do one more subtraction problem. All right, where we do not have a common denominator. How about this one right here? Okay, subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive. Okay, once again, subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive. Okay, so I have negative 4/3, and I'm going to be adding 3/2. But once again, we need a common denominator. Well, what do 3 and 2 both go into? They both go into 6. 6 is a multiple of 3 and 2. All right. So what do I have to multiply that 3 by? I have to multiply it by 2. And what do I have to multiply that 2 by? I have to multiply it by 3. So I get negative 8/6 over 3/6. All right, so negative 4/3 is equivalent to negative 8/6. 3/2 is equivalent to, excuse me, I did something wrong here. That's a 3, not a 1. I did not write this carefully. My apologies. This is 3/2. This is 3/2. I knew 3/2 could not equal 3/6. That's not right. 9/6. There we go. All right, 9 over 6. All right. And now, again, I have a negative and I have a positive. So I have to ask myself, what do I have more of? I've got 9 positives and 8 negatives. So I have one more positive, and it's 1/6. And there is my answer. Okay. All right, and then we have mixed numbers, and mixed numbers work very similarly. Again, when we want to have a common denominator, right? So if we take a look here, we have 3 and 6/7 plus negative 1 and 1/7. All right, so I have one positive and one negative. All right, what do I have more of? I have more of the positives. And fortunately, this is going to work out nicely because I have 6/7 here and 1/7 here. And this is a negative and this is a positive. All right, so 3 minus 1 is going to give me 2 on the whole numbers. And 6/7 minus 1/7, I'm going to get 2 and 5/7. Okay, so I had more positives. How many more positives I have? I had 2 and 5/7. This one right here, what do I have more of? I have more negatives, right? 3 minus 1 is 2, right? And then 4 minus 2 is 2. So I get negative 2 and 2/7. Again, I subtracted the whole numbers, and then I subtracted the fraction part. And again, if you're going, why did you subtract, Mr. Reeves? I thought it was addition. Because when one is positive and one is negative, when you ask yourself, how many more do I have? That's actually a subtraction problem. All right, what if we didn't have a common denominator? So what about one like number 23? All right, this is negative 1 7/8 and negative 3 1/2. So I'm going to have to take that 7/8 and I'm going to have to take that 1/2 and I'm going to have to find my common denominator. Well, what do 8 and 2 both go into? Well, if you're saying they both go into 16, you're right. But here's a case actually where they also both go into 8. So if I'm going to stay with the least common denominator, I don't even have to change that first one. I could just multiply by 1 over 1. 1/2, I'm going to multiply by 4 over 4 because 4 times 2 is 8. All right. So what do I get? When I rewrite this, I get a negative 1 7/8 plus a negative 3 4/8. All right, well, the good news is they're both negative, right? So when you add a negative to a negative, you just get more negatives, right? So I get negative 4. Do you guys agree that negative 1 plus negative 3 is negative 4? And this is where it's going to get a little funky. All right, because I have 7/8 plus 4/8, and 7 plus 4 is 11. And I get negative 4 11/8. Now remember before I said it's perfectly acceptable to leave a number as an improper fraction. And if it were just 11/8 by itself, that would be perfectly acceptable. The problem is this is a mixed number and you cannot have an improper fraction as part of a mixed number. So I have to change that 11/8 to 1 3/8. All right. So then what happens? What's 4 plus 1? 4 plus 1 is 5. And I get negative 5 3/8. All right. Negative 5 3/8. All right. One last one. Here we go. Number 25. And then I am going to finish this video. Okay. So again, we need a common denominator. So I'm going to take this 5/6 here. And I'm going to take the 1/4 here. But actually, before I do that, just a reminder, subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive. Did I happen to mention that subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive? So that's something we're going to keep in mind here. All right, I'm going to erase this right here and put it like here, 1 1/8. So I have space here because I'm going to need that space. All right, so 6 and 4, what number do they both go into? Okay, and again, they both go into 24, so I could do 24, but they also both go into 12, don't they? So I'm going to go with the least common denominator of 12. All right, what do you have to multiply 6 by to get 12? That would be 2. And what do you have to multiply 4 by to get 12? That would be 3. All right. So what do I get? I get 5/6 is the same as 10/12, and I get 1/4 is the same as 3/12. Okay? All right, so here we go. And I know this is kind of complicated. We're going to be writing mixed numbers with their new common denominators. So this is a negative 2 5/6, so it's going to become a negative 2 10/12 right here. All right, and this is a positive now. Excuse me. A positive 1 1/4 is now going to be a positive 1 3/12. Okay. So now we have our common denominator, which is good. Okay, what do we have more of? Do we have more positives or do we have more negatives? We have more negatives, right? How many more negatives do we have? Well, 2 minus 1 is 1. So in the whole number part here, we had 1 more negative. And fortunately, this is smaller. If this was bigger, we would have run into some interesting fun stuff here. But 10 minus 3 is 7, right? So we get negative 1 7/12, okay? Negative 2 10/12 plus positive 1 3/12. Again, 2 minus 1 is 1. 10 minus 3 is 7. And there is our answer. And by the way, 7/12 doesn't simplify. I haven't mentioned it, but all of these answers, when we gotten them, were already simplified. We didn't have to worry about simplifying them when we were done. All right, so that is how you add and subtract fractions. You must find a common denominator, right? And then you must remember those positive and negative rules. When you are adding positive and negatives, you ask yourself, what do I have more of and how many more do I have? Unless they're the same, of course, the positive plus positive just gives you more positives. A negative plus a negative gives you more negatives. And in a subtraction problem, you change the subtraction to addition and you add the opposite. All right, so I hope this video was helpful for you as you add and subtract rational numbers.